Everybody's got a story. You just have to listen. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and this is Good Listen. And you know how we all like to put people in a little box? Like Bob's a lawyer, Cindy's a doctor. Well, my guest today is Rebecca Wild, and she can not neatly fit into a box. She's a yoga teacher, meditation teacher, she's a coach, but she does all these things because she's lived quite a life, and she uses her past traumas to help people today. So we're going to find out how it all started and where it's going. Rebecca Wild, welcome to Good Listen. How are you?
Yes, good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be here.
Oh, no, it's not much of an honor, but I appreciate you saying so anyway. So I want to start this conversation by talking about multi-hyphenates. So as a Gen Xer, I think I'm slightly older than you, maybe more than slightly, but I'm a little older than you. The idea of having multiple talents was unheard of. Like when you saw someone who was like, when I was a kid, like with John Travolta, you're like, wait, he can sing and dance and act. Like, how is that even a possible thing? And now, fast forward 20, 30 years later, you see these people like, Selena Gomez, Lady Gaga, like, yeah, of course they can do that. But I feel it's like maybe a generational shift where you're not identified by one thing. And this sort of encapsulates you. I know there could be better ways of saying it than I am saying it, but you are not just defined by one role or one quote unquote job. You do a lot of things. Has this always been part of your DNA, or is this how you evolved and realized that there were a lot of things you want to do instead of just doing one particular thing?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you've brought that up. I think that is so pivotal. And it's something that I've faced a lot of sort of pushback in my own circle. Definitely as I was finding my way, I think sort of, parents and family are like, oh, I wish you'd gone to university and just got a job. And I'm like, well, I do have a job. I have lots of different jobs. I think I've always been like this. I never fit into the standard, I literally, if you knew how many jobs I'd had, you'd be shocked. I would usually stay for a year and then have two jobs going at the same time. And it just ended up changing into I didn't enjoy working full time. It didn't make me happy, but I could work 16, 17 hours a day doing 3 or 4 different jobs, but not sticking with one full-time job. It's like my brain needed more stimulation. And as I sort of found my way along, I needed stuff that was going to make work feel meaningful for me. I couldn't keep working doing things that I didn't feel like it was aligned with my soul. I didn't feel like it was aligned with my talents and my skill sets, and my sets and talents didn't fit in anywhere else. So it was sort of I had to sort of make my own path a little bit, which I guess is just me finding more of me, and I'm really happy with how it's worked out, even though it's quite unconventional.
Yeah, but honestly, like I said, like it probably was a little more unconventional a few years ago, but I think now people do a lot of different things. Like it's pretty like I'm sure your family was like, what the hell is up with Rebecca? I think we need her to get her some help. But like I think nowadays people know that, hey, I'm not just defined because and one of the things that I've always been sort of intentional over the last few years about is identifying myself by my career. So for my entire adult life from the age of 20 till like about 40, I had the same job. I worked at a radio station in New York, and I was Joe from this radio station. That was my identity. And then the radio station got sold, blown up. So then I had to find something else to do. And I've, worked into podcasting full time now. But the idea of separating your work from yourself, especially for someone in my generation, is very difficult because you're born and raised into thinking, all right, you go to school, you graduate, you find a job, you work that same job for 30 years, you retire and die. I mean, that was essentially the timeline of many people who grew up in the 70s and 80s. So in terms of the way you handle it, when did you realize that you weren't identifiable as one thing? Like, because obviously you mentioned you're doing like 6 different jobs at once. But like, when did you realize that I cannot be known as just Rebecca Wild this or Rebecca Wild that? I needed to. Rebecca Wild is more than just this one thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think the last time I worked a full-time job was I was a dog trainer for a rescue center, a big rescue center for dogs in the UK. I was working with some of England's most dangerous dogs who'd killed people and things like that, and awaiting sort of court probates and things. So it's a very exciting job, and very rewarding, but also quite emotionally overwhelming. And at the same time, I was starting a cake decorating business, which is one of many ventures and like attempts at ventures, and I was bringing in cakes and biscuits every day, making, decorating cookies and things. And I was also writing a book at the same time. And I was working 12-hour days and I was totally burnt out because it was a very physical job at the time, like doing 25,000 steps a day and, writing a book and making cakes. And I was just like, this isn't working. This isn't aligned. And then some crazy intense stuff happened in my life. My partner at the time, his mom died on his birthday, and it was just completely out of nowhere. And it just reframed for me how, short life is. It was really, she was, I think, in her early 50s. It's super unexpected. And just it dropped dead on holiday, basically. And I just thought, God, what am I doing? Like, I need to be finding ways to utilize my skill set and actually figure out who I was. I didn't have a clue who I was at the time. And life is too short to waste it on working for somebody else, in my opinion, unless that works for you, and that's great. But it just definitely wasn't aligned with me. And I think I was chasing all these different ways of getting myself out the system. I was trying to start these little businesses to get myself out of the full-time rat race. I don't think it was because I was particularly, this is my thing. It was because I was like, how can I escape from this and not hate it whilst doing it?
Wow. And a lot of the stuff, I've reeled off the top, but yoga and meditation teacher, holistic health coach, trauma informed practitioner. You got a yogi in there, author, volunteer at suicide helpline. I mean, there's a lot there. And I know business cards aren't a thing anymore, but you couldn't fit that on a business card. So, so the idea of identifying yourself of who you are when you run into people, that typical elevator chat, like when they say, "Hey, Rebecca, what do you do?" Is there a simple answer, or is it a long elevator ride to explain that?
Do you know what? I just pick a job and go with that and see how that conversation works out. I sort of get a vibe of the person. I'm like, which one would they resonate with most? And throw that one out there and let that roll.
That's a great party trick too, because no matter where you're invited to, you could just feel the room out and see like, okay, who would be more inclined to talking about yoga, or who'd be more inclined about talking about tarot. So that's a great skill. All right, so let's boil it down. Why all this? Why all this now in your life? Being the author, being a social media influencer. Like, why now? Why is the time that you're doing all this?
So, I mean, I went through a huge amount of trauma as a child, and a teenager, actually, up until my early 20s. I was in an abusive relationship in my early 20s as well. I lost a baby, like so much just shit happened. And I couldn't, to me, and for me at the same time, I really see it so differently now. But I just, again, like going back to that life is short, you need to enjoy it. I think being somebody who's come from trauma has really helped me realize I need to prioritize my mental health and well-being, and in doing that I need to be doing jobs that I enjoy. And sort of, as I've, if you scroll back on my Instagram, I've had so many different areas of who I am. What I started my Instagram is like a fitness page, and that's actually where all my followers are from, and they've just sort of, some of them have hung around. I've lost quite a few as I've evolved into very different things now. But I think I've realized what I'm good at. I've realized how I can help and how I can make a difference, how I can use my trauma and my pain to really, make that change in other people. I've got a real passion for showing people the way, holding that hand and being like, oh, look, I've done this before. Here's an easier way to get through it. Let me help. And I think I needed to make meaning of it. I needed to make something out of the things that happened. Otherwise, I didn't go through all of that just to go through all of that, you know?
Mm. And part of that, as you mentioned, the book, the Will to Live project. And most people, when they write a book, they dedicate it to someone they know. Like I wrote my book, I dedicated it to my wife and my mom. But your dedication was to Elizabeth Gilbert. Famously wrote "Eat, Pray, Love," I believe. You wrote, "With the burning faith that is only my first book, and that you'll get the chance. This book is dedicated to the woman who inspired me to write, to the woman who showed me that beauty and magic truly is everywhere if you look hard enough, and to the woman whose words have saved me more times than I can count." Safe to assume Elizabeth Gilbert had a profound impact on your life. Can you tell us how that started and why it was so important for you to dedicate the book to her?
Yeah, wow. It's my teenage years were just truly, truly dark. For so many reasons. I was being abused at the time by multiple different men. I was living alone. I was just didn't know what on earth to do with myself, how to function, how to cope. I ended up going down very, very unhealthy routes to cope. to survive. Our worst habits are the best ways of, we need to keep ourselves alive at the time. And Eat, Pray, Love. I know to people who hear the name of it, like, oh, so cliche, such a white girl book, like, but really in it, I think what it showed me is that, oh, it's okay to have feelings. It's okay to have big feelings. There's nothing wrong with that. And not only that, you can really make them beautiful when you put them into words. And when you do that, when you write things down, I've been writing books since I was probably 13, 14, just haven't published all of them. It's very cathartic putting your feelings on paper. And that is honestly what got me through. And I'd go back to her book, read a chapter, where she talks about depression, go back to her book, read about heartbreak or anxiety or whatever it is. And just she has a way of making the words mean something and making the pain mean something, which is what I was desperately searching for at that time in my life.
Wow. And the name of the book, The Will to Live Project. So I'm assuming this is not a light read. So tell me about what, and you mentioned the fact that you've tried writing books in the past, but what is it about this book that you were actually able to get it out there and send it to the masses?
Yeah, so this is really, I call this my legacy book. This is the one that I wanted, if I die now, that's cool. I've got out what I wanted to get out. So I don't have really much of my story in the book itself. I don't really talk about my trauma a massive amount, just in little bits here and there because I didn't want it to be about that. I've written a book for me about that, which is just a personal one. But it's more about, like I said earlier, sort of the way I can handhold. Oh, I've done this before. Here's an easier way to get through it. Let me help. So there's different parts to the book about it's sort of, one is about really the deep pain that we go through. And that's probably my favorite part, really, because I think it can make people feel seen. And there's a whole part about learning to date yourself and find that love. So I'm a really big advocate for self-love, and sort of generally building habits into your life that can make you feel in a better place. It's really about being with people whilst they are in the absolute pits and just slowly nudging them out or just giving them options, hand holding. It's your choice whether you take that hand or not, but it's there.
Wow. There is a crass way when people discuss abusive relationships. The simple refrain is, I'm sure you've heard many times, is like, "Why don't you just leave? Why do you put up with it? What? Why?" Now looking back at it, and now that you've gone through this journey of healing, um, could you answer that question now? Like, why didn't you leave those relationships? Or was it something that maybe you knew early on, but still couldn't? Because again, it's that herky jerky. Like, why do these women put up with it? Why do these men put up with it? Why don't they just leave? We all know it's more complicated than that, but people always like to simplify things. So when did you come to that realization of the reason why you weren't able to leave some of these relationships?
Yeah, so I was in that relationship for nearly 4 years. And I absolutely take responsibility for my part in it now. I'm not somebody who shies away from the fact that I 100% have responsibility. I could have left earlier. I could have got help. There's so many different ways. But I was a complete train wreck when he met me. I was addicted to alcohol, addicted to sex, addicted to partying. My self-esteem was a zero. I'd been abused by men my whole life. It didn't seem like anything different. It didn't seem like anything. This is how relationships are. But this person actually is going to hang around with me. This is never going to happen. Most of them just leave. So I guess lucky me. This is the best thing. Um, at first, it was definitely like the self-esteem. And as he sort of wore me down, and we ended up buying a house together. Really don't do that with an abusive partner. Not a good idea. And then money was a massive, massive threat. The money thing, I couldn't afford to be on my own. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how I was going to cope with that. And the fear was a massive part as well. So it was like, I don't know, the fifth time he tried to kill me, that I was like, I need to get out of this now. But if I try and get out of this, is he going to kill me again? So the way I did it was I had keys in my hand for the car, bag was already packed in the car. And it was the fourth time I think I'd asked to leave, or I'd said I'm going to leave. Every time before that had not gone well. And he punched through the door. I literally ran for my life to the car and drove off. And it was a matter of I had to get myself into the place where I had the courage to get away from that and be able to be aware that I was going to then be leading a life of fear. He could be around the corner any day. He could hurt me any day. He could hurt my family. He could come for the dog. Like there were so many different things I had to get myself in a place of strength for to be able to leave in the first place. So yeah, I mean, and also I was so worn down. At that time I'd had early cervical cancer. I had 7 surgeries in my womb. I had my dog, who was the only thing getting me through, died tragically in a spay. Like, there was so many things, and his mother died as well. So many things that sort of didn't help the situation, and didn't, every time I thought I might have the courage now, something else traumatic would happen. I'd be like, nope, never mind. I'll hang around. But it was, it was a really miserable time for me. And I have been filming YouTube videos since I was about 12 years old. So it's amazing for me to be able to look back and see the videos I was filming during that time and be like, wow, that's, wow, completely. It's amazing, actually, the difference in me now.
Wow. It is funny how Western culture, I think whether you live in Europe or you live in the United States, is how much we take safety for granted. Like this idea that we all are like, oh, we're all safe. We don't live in a horrific, oppressive environment, whether it's in Africa or Middle East, something like that, where if you're a woman, you're lesser than, or if you're poor, you are like the definition of poor in the United States and the definition of poor in some of these other third world countries is a complete different ballgame. So this idea of safety, you had no idea what it was like to be safe during your relationships and then after. And I know this could be a hard question to answer, but when did you start to feel safe? When did you feel like that idea of like, when I turn the corner, that asshole's not going to be there, or oh my god, I'm not going to be able to afford my rent? Like, what did, or maybe you're not. Maybe I'm just presuming, but when did you start to feel safe?
I mean, I don't know that I'll ever feel completely safe from him. There was never, I never, he never went to jail or anything. It was very much, unfortunately, his family threatened me, and they were very, very powerful people. So I didn't go through with that. So he's still out there, and that's still a risk. And I still get jumpy if I hear a really loud car, because he had a really loud exhaust in his car. So that's still something that I live with. But in terms of feeling able to go about my daily life without being, constantly on edge with my nervous system, it was genuinely only probably 2 or 3 years ago, probably 2 years ago. I'm with this amazing partner now, and it's been a real sort of one of those kind of loves that it's like slow burning and beautiful and patient and kind. And it was never like fast, intense, like I'd always known before. I spent 2020 getting to know myself. And at the end of it, I was like, I'm not meeting anybody. I don't want to meet. I don't want to be with anyone. Like, I love hanging out with me now. I got to know who I am. Nobody's ruining this piece that I've created for myself. Absolutely not. And then it very much happened by accident. And I think it has taught me how to feel safe in a relationship, how to trust someone again, or in any way, because I don't think I've ever really trusted before. So it's a combination of like my new relationship, working intensely hard on myself. It's like I am a student of life, big time. Every day I'm reading self-help psychology books, always doing courses. As you can see from my website, I'm always trying to build so that I can heal, so that I can grow, learn, and help other people. So as corny, that sounds really awful, doesn't it? When I'm like, helping other people. I don't mean it in that way, but
Pretty
um,
awesome. All right, let me ask you this. I'm trying to find. I'm not very good at words. So, when you're in an abusive relationship, there is a feeling about it, like that is constantly there. What is the feeling like when you're in an abusive relationship as opposed to being in the current relationship in where you obviously found a partner that is an actual partner? Is there a word to describe the differences in terms of how you feel in that space? And I'm talking about like day to day. You know how like we all just their days go by like, what happened today? I don't even remember what oh, what day of the week is it? We all get lost in the sauce. But like, what are the differences in feelings from being in an unsafe relationship to a safe relationship? Or is it just completely obvious and this is a stupid question?
no, I think that's a great question. I mean, my relationship now, which I think compared to probably lots of other people's relationships, is very good, and just due to a lot of work that I've done and that we've done together, I feel calm. I feel at peace. There's no drama. We don't scream and shout. It doesn't exist. We just have a, oh, I didn't like this on. Okay, let's talk about it. It's very, it's almost quite predictable in a really nice way. Whereas in the abusive relationship, I never knew what was coming. I never knew what mood he'd be in. I never knew what what when he was coming home, and what it would mean when he came home. Was this a good day? Was this a bad day? I'd have weeks, sometimes months, where there would be nothing, and I'd be like, is it getting better? Is everything okay? And then it would just be like that, bam, worst he's ever been, and it was just so you never knew. what was happening, what was coming. And I think that's the difference in that I have way more stability. Maybe that's the word, stability now.
Yeah. No, I love that. Even like predictability. I know it's sort of like a word that we all shun. Like, oh God, you don't want to have a predictable life. But look at it. Look at the difference between predictable and unpredictable. I think most people, after listening to your story or reading about what you've gone through, like, yeah, I'll take predictability any day of the week than unpredictability, right? Oh man,
Yeah.
that's great. All right, so you mentioned coaching. We don't have enough time in this podcast to discuss all the things that you coach. Empowerment, energy, family, grief, happiness, health. Like I said, I could go on and on. I could fill the whole podcast with the amount of things. How do you pull that off? I mean, we started this conversation talking about being multifaceted, but there's a lot of stuff here that people do as specialties in particular fields. So tell me about this range of things that you help with coaching on.
Yeah, so I think from a marketing perspective, I really got to niche down. Like that would be the best thing to do. And all of the business coaches are like, you got to niche down. But I'm so keen to work with people where they are. And I don't want to put people off by saying, I'm just a spirituality coach. When I'm like, whoa, there's so much more that we can work with here. There's so much, and the suicide hotline I volunteer at, you never know what call you're getting. You are put on the spot there and then, and it's not like, oh, this isn't my specialty, so I can't handle this. It's like, okay, cool, I'm going to work with you where you are right now, because it's not just suicide calls. We get general, every, life's melting down for this reason, and it's anything. So I think that's probably helped me. It's really helped me. I think it would help anyone. I think it's a great thing to do if you're in the right mindset to do it. Help me get to a place where I can meet people where they are very much, but I also just want to, like, I don't want people to feel alone in any sense of the way I did. And I think I've had so much lived experience in like weird different sectors. Women's health has been a massive part of my life. I've had so many surgeries there, abuse, trauma, um, you know, eating disorders, mental health. I've been in so many different lived experience spaces myself and worked through the other side of them. I think it'd be a waste if I didn't offer that as a support at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the suicide help hotline. I mean, that after everything you've been through, to put yourself through that, because I think that is, I can't even imagine what it's like to see some of the phone calls. Is there anyone you can share that something's happened recently, maybe, or something that either you help the person or you gain something from that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, we can't talk about the calls from like a confidentiality point of view, but I can sort of give you a rough idea of the kind of thing that we work with, in the sense of, I have saved people's lives, which is an insane feeling, walking away from your shift being like, whoa, I've changed the trajectory of somebody's entire life cycle today. And also I've been with people as they're going through some really difficult stuff. We speak to an awful lot of prisoners. I have a completely different perspective on, for example, pedophilia. I have a completely different perspective on it than I think probably most people do, because I speak to them in real life, and I've also been the victim of pedophiles. And it's like, it's so interesting having that. I think about it a lot, actually, the way that I don't think the way everybody else in the mainstream does, and I'm a victim. It's an odd space to be. So just a huge variety, and with grief, we speak to a lot of grief as well, that's hard. That's hard.
Yeah. Um, One of the other things you also do is a meditation teacher. I've been able to grow in this society enough where when I was a kid, the idea of meditation was like, look at this weird over here meditating. And now it's become like, even like companies have like meditation time for their employees. So something Bill Maher always says, like, and I like to say too, is like, we've really evolved as a society. We're not perfect, and I don't think we ever will be, but we've gotten better at things. And meditation is one of those things, the acceptance of it, and actually scientific studies in terms of like the benefits of it. So tell me about the importance of meditation to your life and teaching it.
Yeah, I mean, I was exactly the same. I was like, "Oh, shut up! Don't tell me to meditate. That's not the way. You don't know how bad things are for me. You don't know what I'm going through. It's not going to work." Um, and then, like, I mean, I've been doing it since I was in my teens. Again, when I was in that really dark phase, and I've been going to a monastery on and off, like visiting. I don't necessarily agree with it in the same way that I used to, based on my. I just know things differently now. It's too rigid and too strict for me, that type of meditation now. But I really genuinely think it can be as powerful as psychedelic trips. Like, and I stand by that. In the sense of, even when I don't need to sit there and not think about anything. My brain is like constantly chatting, constantly doing, as you can probably tell by my portfolio career. So I will sit for like, I don't know, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 45 minutes. And sometimes my brain will chat at me the whole time about what I'm going to do with the garden next year, or, like just random shit. And I'm like, surely this isn't going to help. Surely this isn't going to make any difference. Surely this is a waste of time. But I'll come out of it the other side, or even the next morning, and I'll have this incredible creative idea, or like, oh, I could do this and it'll fix this problem in my life. And this is only, I've been meditating every day consistently for about 3 months this year, and last year, but it was sort of the whole of last year, every other day, probably until I've been doing it every day religiously twice a day. And it's like, I now don't know what I'd do without it. It's become such a big part of my day, even if my brain is just talking at me the whole time. So
What
it
are
just
some of the typical like effects? Like, can you mention something that now that you've taken it incredibly seriously, doing every day? What is something that you've noticed that's about you that has changed in, in a way that because of meditation?
like my emotional regulation, 100%. I'm like, I don't have ups and downs now. I'll have sometimes where I'm feeling things and I'll go sit in meditation. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I'm feeling things. That's okay. It's not the end of the world that I'm feeling sad, whereas before it'd be like, oof, gosh, this is really a problem. And now I'm like, oh, look, there's a feeling. Cool. That's cool. And I just think there's so much more stability in the way that I carry myself based on that. And also just like so much more like love within myself, like self-love, and also commitment to the work that I do and what I want to create in the world.
That's awesome. You write and talk about compassion a lot in the way you work, and I feel like we're now in a time society of like devoid of compassion. Like we're having this discussion right after the California wildfires, and you're hearing like these politicians say, "Yeah, we'll help people in California, but they've got to fall in line first." And so you hear like this cold hardness, and it's almost like in the past, compassion, like people who lack compassion, it was private. And now people publicly lack compassion. I mean, you see it on social media every day when something happens in the news, like, oh, good for them. They deserve it. It's like, what happened? Like, as someone who basically lives their life in a world of compassion, whether it's helping people on a hotline, on social media, with your coaching, let's start there. What happened to compassion? Where did it go?
I think it's fear. I really, really think it's fear. And I think that people have become so attached to fear through really like mainstream media. I think if you watch the news, if you're on social media too much, you just see it every day. Like, I'm not surprised. I fear doesn't exist in my life at all. And I think that's probably what differentiates me. I'm not scared of death. I'm very spiritual in the sense of the way I perceive death. It's like, cool, no problem, going to the next life, chill, whatever. Whereas like I think people are like, God, the world's the worst it's ever been. Like, I can't believe how bad things are now. It's never been this bad. We've never been this divided. I'm like, yes, we have. Look back in history, read The Fourth Turning, have a look at some of the historical situations we've been through. This is just a cycle that we're going through. And unfortunately, like people's addiction to fear is like what makes them feel in control, when it's actually that perception of control is completely fake. And there's so much more control when you find peace within yourself, and then you can just spread that everywhere as well.
Yeah, but it is so sad that like I don't know what it is, and I don't know if it's false like hate. Like maybe if in real life, if someone told them a story, they wouldn't react it. But in a way, I mean, that's where social media comes, desensitizes you, and just like I use this example of like I remember when like the Kardashians blew up on Twitter, and you would follow them, and they would like post a selfie, and then on the bottom would be like 10,000 horrific things from people where if any of those people ran into a Kardashian in person, they'd be gawking and like asking for a picture. So
Yep.
maybe there's some sort of desensitization there where it comes to lack of compassion. And it's funny you mentioned the fact how like there is cycles. I mean, last year there was that series, and I read the book called "Say Nothing About the Troubles" in Northern Ireland, which is right there in your backyard. Northern Ireland and Great Britain, and the shit that those people were fighting over, and that wasn't like the 1800s. That was not. That was like from the 60s to like the 2000s. This was going on. These people who were essentially, if you looked at them, they looked like the same person, yet they had a different religion or different political ideology. So we're not far removed from that, and now we're unfortunately seeing that again in modern times in 2020s in terms of politics and religion. It seems like I hate to say a wonderful time for you to be doing what you're doing because we need people like you to help in this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody is capable of taking themselves away from fear. I think just get off your phone for one, get off the news. second and spend some time with yourself. And I think addressing people are so scared of feeling uncomfortable. And this is a really big thing that I've gone through recently. Obviously, you got to be compassionate with yourself. You got to do the protective boundaries, heal yourself stuff. Then when you get strong enough, get uncomfortable so that you can grow and learn and develop. It's so necessary, and people run away from that, and run away from suffering when actually you've got to suffer a little bit in order to grow and develop as a human being and be able to work better and evolve better in this world and help fix problems. Whereas now people are saying, look at that problem that so and so is creating, or that race, or that religion, or that gender, or whatever it is, and projecting their own fear of, oh my God, everything is frightening me. I don't feel strong enough here. When it's just a space of being able to work on it yourself. I know that sounds easy when I say it like that, but I think there's so much scope and possibility if people are able to take responsibility for their shit.
Yeah. And that's take away from people who haven't been through what you've been through, but then also help other people. But how much better does it make your work because you come with like an informed background in this, or does it make it difficult for you? Like, is it harder? Like, I guess is it harder or easier doing what you do because of what you've been through?
I think lived experience is always a great advantage to being able to work with people. And there's so much to be said for one thing in particular, like being pregnant and losing a baby. You don't know what that's like until you've experienced it. You just sort of see it from the outside. That was a massive thing for me, where I was like, whoa, I had no idea what that was like. And now I can completely understand a whole different world there. I think it can be really, really helpful. I don't personally find it challenging working with similar stories and situations. It doesn't trigger me in that sense. And if it does, I work with my triggers and I don't run away from them. It's something I'm very passionate about. Cool, I got triggered. That's no big deal. I'll deal with it. Do you know what I mean? But I know a lot of people aren't in that space yet, and they will. It's just giving yourself time to get to that place.
Yeah, you know how when you try to comfort someone, you always say something, and because you run out of words, you're like, "I know what you're going through." I mean, you literally know what people are going through in that situation. So that in itself, it probably helps the other side of it. Saying like, "Oh, this person is just learning it from a book or a course she took. She's been through the shit, so she actually has some tangible advice for me."
Yeah, and I think, that's it in terms of you can do all the most incredible courses in the world, but without, you could still be terrible at the job if whereas lived experience, I think, can give you that advantage, that one up in it of, oh yeah, I see you. You can never say I understand because that's like really patronizing. So you have to like reword it, or even I don't mention anything that I've been involved. You can't talk about yourself on the suicide hotline, for example. There's no personal anecdotes or anything like that there. But I know sort of what I'm thinking in my head is what does this person need to hear right now? What do they need me to say? What comfort do they need? And that is the gap there where I can get some wins in and make those changes, or help them make them changes themselves.
And how much of yourself are you able and willing to share in some of these moments? You mentioned you can't do it in the hotline, but in your coaching, because that's the thing too. Like, do you set up like guardrails for yourself? Like, I'm not going to go this deep into my past lived experiences in this conversation with this person. Or are there times where you have to share your story if they have a similar background as you? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I think it can be really easy, and something I used to be a real problem for was to like overshare. Do you know what I mean? Particularly with like trauma dumping, trauma oversharing. So if I ever bring it up, which isn't particularly often because sometimes I don't think it's that helpful because they're like, yeah, but it's not the same as what I'm going through, even though it sort of is, but it's not. It's only if I ever bring things up with that, it's only because when this happened, here's what helped. That's more. It's like for how you got out rather than that. Oh yeah, I went through that too. Poor me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I wonder is it and you mentioned a bit earlier, like, you have to kinda cleanse yourself a little bit after the fact when you do this, like, is that where the meditation comes in? Is that, like, after you've had these sort of triggers, that you need to take that break from it because it hits too close to home?
Yeah, 100% meditation, intuitive movement as well, like dance, things like that. I'm very, very strict with my evening routine. I have that's almost like my cleansing process, really. I have like spa music on, and I'm doing in my meditation. I do my stretching. I listen to what my body needs. I do journaling, affirmations, all that jazz. Like very much from the book, How to Make Yourself Happier situation. I call it my anti-depression routine, right? And then I read some kind of, at the moment, I'm reading The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck, and some kind of psychology, self-helpy, I'm learning, I'm making progress type book. It's like that whole closure routine for me, really.
Wow. So essentially, you ignore your partner once the sun goes down. Like your partner no longer sees you. Well, listen. I'm about to start my end routine. If you got something for me, give it to me now. If not, I'm about to shut down for the night.
Exactly. It's literally like that. Exactly like that. And I think that this is why I'm like, I'm quite an advocate for our relationship because I don't think it's conventional in the sense that we are so okay with us time. And yet when we love each other with so much depth and intensity, but it's not addictive. It's not like, the way we fell in love was very much, I was thinking of all the reasons why it wasn't going to work. We were literally friends with benefits. And I was like, oh, this is all this is. I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
And then we just ended up really, that friendship deepened. And it has just been a blossoming friendship, respecting boundaries, respecting our own time. It's not chasing each other around, waiting for a text, anything like that. It's so much healthier than that.
Wow, that's so cool. I wonder, and I don't know if you want to speak for your partner or can, but there is this whole thing, and it's kind of a shitty word, but like baggage. That when people with baggage come into a new relationship or just meet someone, there's like this parachute reaction. I'm pulling the cord. I'm getting out of here. There's too much baggage here. So what was it that your partner saw in you and your relationship that didn't scare him off? Because I think that's something a lot of people may run into where, maybe they're new to dating someone new and then all of a sudden they find out all this stuff that's happened in their past. What was it for him that he was able to see not past it, but like almost like accept it as just part of who you are and it doesn't matter because he loves you for that person.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think, first of all, he comes with his own baggage as well, which I think probably does sometimes balance things out because you're like, well, second, I think basically the things we have, our conversations are so deep. It's never like how's your day, what's the weather? It's like what's the meaning of life? Like that's the kind of thing that we talk about, and it's I think because it's so difficult to find somebody who's totally on the same wavelength of you, particularly in the modern world of dating. We've also known each other really since I was 18, so we had a friendship already, a special friendship, and then this was before I was in my abusive relationship, and then we reconnected after. So it was almost like we'd seen each other in our worst space in our life, and then reconnected when almost the dust had settled, and it was like, right, well, I better try and get myself together now then. And we almost met each other on the up, which I think is also is a point is the timing.
Wow, that's great. All right, let's wrap this up. If someone pops this on and they're involved in a shitty relationship, and as we all know, there's grades of it. It's a wide spectrum. What's the first piece of advice you give to someone who is starting to question the relationship that they're in? Is there anything you learned about yourself from your coaching experience that can help them in those initial processes of identifying the relationship that they're in?
Yeah, so I'm all for practical tips for this kind of thing. So definitely one thing I started doing was I'd write down every single time something happened, the date, the time, how long it lasted. And it was a record for me more than anything so that I could be like, oh, look, Rebecca, it's happened this many times this month and that's not okay. And I think writing it down is a great place to start and be able to see that it's not okay. Joining certain groups, things like Reddit, which can be an awfully toxic place, so please be careful there. But certain groups where you may have some kind of resonance or people backing you up and be like, no, don't accept that. That's not okay. That's not healthy. It took from a friend to say, Rebecca, I'm going to call the police if you don't leave now, for me to really start thinking seriously about leaving. And I left that same month. So having somebody else as input as well I think can be quite powerful.
Awesome. Her name is Rebecca Wild. Rebecca, if folks wanted to get in touch with you, find out more about you, get some coaching in one of the 700 things that you coach upon. Where should they start?
Yeah, so my website is rebeccawild.org and my Instagram and all my social media is Rebecca Wild with 4 A's in between. And I'm pretty much always on there. So that's the best place to find me.
Awesome. Rebecca, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And that's going to do it for today's Good Listen. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. If you want to connect with me, shoot me a note, follow me on social media, just go to joepardavila.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, it would be so awesome if you hit that thumbs up button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel. And if you're on Apple or Spotify, a 5-star review would be greatly appreciated. Thanks again. I will see you next time. Adios.